Hi, everybody. I'll be with you in a minute. I just need to share a little bit first. Mhm. Hi, everybody. How are you tonight? Susan? Hi, Kay. Watching Hardlands Media. Okay. They're having an argument over there, I think. At least it sounded. I don't know if it's an argument. They're having an argument with other people. They're having an argument with Mr. Buttigieg. Dale says, "Good evening, comrades and friends." And Kay says, "Share your posts to my page." And the Laura says, "Hi all." Russ says, "Evening. I can stay for a little while tonight." Okay, Russ. Glad to have you. And Evelina says, "I shared." Thank you, Evelina. Dale says, "Gaining steam, huh?" You're damn right. Yeah. And Lana has joined, and Evelina has joined, of course, and Bonnie has joined. Teresa Sanders has joined. And Teresa Sanders says, what's up, Doc? Steve DeVore has joined. Hey, Steve, how are you? Okay, so let us get to it. Bernie's political revolution is gaining steam. If you've been watching the events out in Iowa, I mean, even though Bernie is in Senate jail at this point, listening to the arguments repeat and repeat and repeat, and contemplating, I'm sure, that Trump was being impeached in the wrong way for the wrong thing, and that the whole thing is getting completely botched. I'm well, Steve. And he's sitting there thinking, boy, I could be in Iowa right now. But The good part is that his surrogates, including Jane and also Naomi Klein, also Michael Moore and AOC, have been doing a wonderful job for him out there. A really wonderful job. And I think he's been gaining ground while he's been locked up in jail in the Senate. He's been gaining ground. He's been gaining ground in Iowa. He's been gaining ground in New Hampshire. And as we'll see tonight from some of the news articles, he's been gaining ground in other places too. Well, let's begin to go to the various articles and see what they have to say. The first is an article from Truthdig that I want to bring up. It makes a very good point, and the headline says Bernie Sanders is long overdue. I believe that's very true. We've been waiting for so long. We've been waiting 40 to 45 years for this revolution to happen. The article is written by Alan Minsky, who's a contributor to Truthdig. And it's been around, as I recall, for a few days now. Let's see if we can get the date here. January 29th, 2020. Nice picture of Bernie there. And the article makes the point that Bernie is offering something unique to our country, to the political landscape, a transformative vision for a more just and equitable country, and a renewal of American democracy. It may be more than a renewal. It may be a recreation of American democracy so that it truly becomes a democracy for the first time. Minsky says his movement is based on four central tenets. The American political system is currently broken, unable to respond to the needs of the people on the planet. That sure looks like that to me. Doesn't it look that way to you? There needs to be a political realignment along lines of economic self-interest, uniting the working class. I'd say it's more than the working class, basically uniting all who work for a living. If that's what you mean by the working class, then yes, okay, it's the working class. But I think in this case, he comes close to representing the 99%. The realignment, combined with a powerful appeal to common sense morality, anti-racist, anti-war, pro-environment, and universal inclusion, will build a new progressive majority. And even so, there must also be a revival of citizen participation in politics, lest the movement be crushed by big money interests. Yes, we need to have citizen participation in politics in a variety of ways. Okay, but even at election time, we should be up there at 80 to 85%, okay, of the potential voters. Not where we are now, down around 50%. But we need more than electoral participation. We need participation every day in some form or fashion, if only participation in politics on social media. But we need more than just on social media, of course. I don't mean to imply that that's all that's necessary. Sanders is correct on all four fronts. Until such a program is successfully implemented, says Alan Minsky, our endemic social and political crises will continue unabated. And he points to the decades long stalemate, the party stalemate. I don't think there's been a stalemate, okay, in other ways. There's a party stalemate. The polarization has served the interests of the masters of both of the parties. And Minsky says the stalemate invariably preserves the status quo, frustrating anybody who tries to change things democratically. Sanders' revolution, which is going to unite working people across the racial divide, promises a relief from this stasis, and there's ample evidence that it's going to deliver the kind of electoral victory in the House and Senate that is required to do just that. I'd say there's some evidence of that. Some evidence of that. I'm very hopeful of that. As I said, Bernie's campaign is gaining steam. And so there's some evidence that he'll be able to get supporters both in the House, okay, and in the Senate. But it always takes a longer time to turn the Senate. The establishment power is very entrenched there. It's very entrenched in the House also, as well, but even more so in the Senate. And of course, only 1/3 of the Senate changes every 2 years, whereas the whole House potentially can change in a single 2-year election. Of course, it does take longer than that because people hang around with the incumbents, often for some time. Anyway, Minsky goes on and says, before I turn to that evidence, however, let's make clear what it would mean for American politics if Bernie were to triumph in November. He said, we could begin to meaningfully deal, but only begin to, Alan, only begin to meaningfully deal with climate change, wealth inequality, the housing and healthcare crises, and perhaps wind down our forever wars in the Middle East. Under a moderate Democrat, nothing will be done. Nothing is going to get done. Despite this establishment, favorites like Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota and former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete maintained Sanders as a dreamer, and his platform would never make it through Congress, and only the incrementalist goals have a chance of getting realized. But what they don't say is that the moderate agenda wouldn't do anything to alter the basic realities of life in America, in which the rich get richer while working people continue their slide into debt by peonage. Yes, indeed. But even worse than that, it would do nothing to alter the climate reality or the education reality or the medical care or the variety of other crises that we currently have in America. Student debt, for example, free college, for example. The housing crisis, for example. The moderate Democrats have an alibi. Those evil Republicans won't let them do more. This, of course, is total nonsense. It's their wealthy donors who won't let them do more. The Republicans won't let them do anything. If, on the other hand, Sanders can alter the balance of American politics with a new majoritarian coalition, real necessary change but could happen. Could happen. Could happen. But still might be blocked because victories in the first 2 years might not be strong enough to make it happen. But Bernie has a remedy for that, of course, and his remedy is that not only will the Congress change, that's not the whole of the political revolution. What's also going to happen is that the weight of the revolution will immediately be felt because of the movement's continuous participation in the political system and continuous pressure on the Congress and on Bernie to accomplish what was promised, to get done what needs to be done. And Minsky correctly says Bernie intends to achieve this by dramatically expanding the electorate, something he has already done by energizing young voters and deploying his legions of supporters to the kinds of communities politicians tend to overlook. Joy Mann was doing a live stream from Iowa today, pointed out um, over the weekend they knocked on 102,000 doors in Iowa. 102,000 doors in one weekend. Sanders has also proved more popular with the white working class than Democratic candidates have in recent election cycles. His appeal to this bloc is the same as it is to people of color. The difference is that the former has overwhelmingly voted Republican in recent years. If Sanders could win over even a portion of these voters, he'd likely break our political stalemate. Yes, he would. He makes the point that if we got the multiracial working class coalition we're looking for, it could finally end the de facto protection of white the privilege which the modern Republican Party has been able to preserve and perpetuate since it began targeting Dixiecrats as part of its racist Southern strategy. And he points out this is the bedrock of Trump's appeal, allowing him to gain the allegiance of many white voters without providing any improvements to their material conditions. But he also points out Sanders can take a sledgehammer to that bond by meaningfully bettering the lives of all working people. He points out that this alone could shatter the GOP's hold on power. He goes on and says, a lifetime of following American politics tells me that little, if any, progress can be made in this country without tackling the persistence of structural racism. As long as it goes unaddressed, it will continue to cause harm and pervert our collective sense of justice. The Sanders movement is committed to doing what's necessary to overcome this scourge, going beyond the fatuous claims of equal opportunity that are promoted by the Democratic establishment. Sanders calls for direct investment in poor communities of color and universal voting rights and registration, criminal justice reform, and a radical reduction in incarceration, all while seeking nothing less than the eradication of the racial wealth gap. It's an agenda that aims to lift every family into the middle class. If you think I'm exaggerating, here's a link to the platform, the Sanders platform. And we've gone over the platform here in detail, various elements of it came on a number of occasions. And he's not exaggerating. He's not exaggerating. It would lift everybody into the middle class, other than, of course, when he does that, it would change the definitions, of the middle class, but it would end poverty in America. Suffice it to say that. And he says, suffice it to say that if he was successful, it would truly be a new day in America. He points to the fact that Poles would welcome, with open arms, the kind of change that he proposes, including the new policies of reducing the Pentagon budget, sane gun laws, a humane policy of immigration, expansion of Social Security, the erasure of student debt, guaranteed vacation time, guaranteed leave, for women, the $60,000 minimum salary for teachers, equal pay for equal work, a federal jobs guarantee, and Medicare for all. And don't forget the green policies. Alan Minsky, why do you forget the Green New Deal? The green policies. Here. Perhaps most important, we could respond to the climate emergency on a scale scientists say is actually necessary. I thought this dealt with climate change. Where was it? I'm getting almost done with the piece. Hardly any discussion. Of course, no discussion of climate change is complete without mentioning the other plague on America's political system, what I call the lobbying industrial complex. And he points out how doing anything about the fossil fuel industry has been very, very difficult because of the power of the lobbying industrial complex and the big donors. And he says, perhaps you're wondering, would the lobbyists succeed in blocking the Sanders agenda? And Minsky says, if he were a mere politician, the answer might be yes. But Bernie is also the lead organizer of a mass movement, the central aim of which is to mobilize Americans to take back their government from the big money interests, and one that is designed to prevail. If you think any House member is going to get away with voting against President Sanders' climate policies, to choose one example, you're simply not paying attention. Any such official would face pressure from his or her constituents far surpassing a handful of expensive suits. Indeed, he or she would be unlikely to survive a primary. Call it a democracy in action. And then finally, with the Iowa caucus less than a week away, it's important we step back and recognize that legions of Bernie backers are having the time of their lives. This is a magnetic movement with loads of conscientious, intelligent people of all ages, from all backgrounds. It turns out that redeeming American society is a blast, and the fun is just beginning. Absolutely, Alan Minsky. The fun. We're seeing the fun. We're far away from the fun in Iowa. We're far and away from the New Hampshire fun. But we're feeling the fun when we see the meetings. We're feeling the fun. We're feeling the hope. We're feeling the energy. It is a magnetic movement. And we all feel the magnetism when we watch these meetings, replete with care, replete with love, replete with concern, and replete with humanity. We see now that Bernie seems to have a very big lead, okay, in Iowa now, at least a 9-point lead, and it seems to be expanding, okay, in Iowa. It's evidently a larger lead in New Hampshire, more like but 12 points now. Someone said today he's at 30%, okay, in New Hampshire now, in terms of some of the latest polls, okay, that are coming out. But it's spreading beyond New Hampshire, okay, in Iowa now. Uh, there are polls showing that he's finally beginning to cut into Joe Biden's margins in South Carolina. That the more elderly people, those over 49, the group from 49 to 64, and the group 65, okay, and older, in both of those segments, in both of the demographics, there have been large gains for Bernie over the last 2 weeks or so. Now, Biden has a considerable lead in South Carolina still. He still has a considerable lead there. But Bernie is beginning to cut into the lead. I haven't seen a Nevada poll actually recently, but a recent California poll is said to show Bernie with 30% in California, with something like a 15-point lead over Joe Biden there. It's a huge lead. It's a huge lead over Biden in California right now. Yes, I know the DNC is fixing to use various dirty tricks in order to deprive him of that vote. And there's going to be a battle royale there, no question about it. There's probably going to be one in Iowa. There's probably going to be one in, I'm sure Nevada is going to have some shenanigans too, and we'll have to guard against that. But big surprise today. Big surprise today. Specifically, The Hill. Sorry for all these ads. Article by Zachary Budrick. Zach at 8:48 on AM today. Poll finds Sanders faring best against Trump in Texas. This was a Lyceum poll. Not too familiar with that particular poll, and of course it's only one poll. But it shows that in Texas, there was a huge 13-point gain for Bernie in this particular poll. And that he's nearly caught up and is in a statistical tie with Joe Biden. Biden has 28%. Bernie has 26% now. Warren is down to 13%. There's 9% from Mayor Michael Bloomberg. And Buttigieg has 6%, and Amy has 4%. And all the others don't have much. So it looks like there's a top tier, and it's Biden and Bernie who are fighting it out. Looks like all the momentum is with Bernie. He just endorsed Jessica Cisneros just about a day ago, if I recall correctly. And that's likely to give him a boost in some parts, okay, of Texas. And he is also likely to give her a boost. It's good for both of them. It's good for both of them. But it speaks to the momentum that he's building in the state, okay, of Texas. Okay. Now Texas is really a must-win for Biden. I mean, it's a must-win. He could win in South Carolina, but if he doesn't win in Texas and he doesn't do well in California, he's done. He's on the point of losing it. Okay, in California. I mean, it looks like he might even be struggling to make 15% in California. And it looks like he's about to lose momentum in Texas as well, or has already lost it. The same poll showed some interesting results with respect to the matchups with Trump. Now, Trump is ahead in that particular Texas poll, but Sanders did get 47% compared to 50% for Trump, which is a result within the poll's margin of error, which is roughly 4% for the whole poll and 4.89% for the taking just the Democratic sample. Just behind that was Joe Biden, who won 46% to Trump's 51%. And Warren got 44% compared to 52%, while Mayor Pete, sorry about this, I know it's confusing to read, got 43% compared to Trump's about 51%. So those are the results of that particular poll. As I recall, the poll had I thought it had a sample of 1,000. Yeah, 1,000 adult citizens in Texas. There were 520 likely general election voters. Poll was taken from January 10th to 19th. So it's a little old now, even. As I said, the margin of error was 4.89 for the primary voters. There were 401 of them, okay, for the Democrats. And that had a margin of error 4.89, as I said, and a 4.3 margin of error for the general election voters. So that's another result that suggests that Bernie is not only on track for very solid wins in Iowa and in New Hampshire, but also on track to do very well in California and in Texas as well. The campaign continues to build momentum, considerable momentum. That's probably because of all the people having great fun working for the campaign and all the people having great fun contributing small dollars to it. I mean, when a campaign asks you for $2.70, how can you say no? I mean, even when they ask you for $2.70 quite a few times a month, almost every day, you still can't say no too often. That's especially true when you love that campaign. More momentum is being built by the things the Sanders campaign continues to do. New policy proposals that come out and the actions of the Sanders team, as written up by this article by Jake Johnson, staff writer for Common Dreams. Title of the article is, well, it was written January 30th, 2020, and the title is Sanders Team Weighing Executive Orders to Legalize Marijuana, Stop the Border Wall, Declare Climate Emergency, and more. And what Jake tells us here is that Bernie staff is reportedly preparing dozens of potential executive orders, which will address an array of pressing issues the Vermont senator has made central to his 2020 presidential campaign, from confronting the climate crisis to lowering prescription drug prices to reversing President Trump's racist immigration policies. And you know what Bernie can do because you know the terrible things that Trump has done that Bernie can reverse with other executive orders. He cannot reverse all the damage that was done, but he can stop it. And he can come up with executive orders of his own that greatly improve the situation. WAPO's Jeff Stein cited two anonymous people familiar with the campaign's plans and an internal document reported on Thursday that Sanders aides have presented the senator with a list of possible executive orders that would allow him to, quote, the document reviewed by the Post shows how the Sanders campaign has already begun extensive planning for how the senator would lead the country in his first days as president if he won the nomination of the Democratic Party and defeated Trump in November. Okay, many of the proposals Sanders has floated on the campaign trail do not have support from congressional Republicans and are opposed by some Democrats. So a willingness to move forward without congressional approval could determine whether many of his policies are enacted, unquote. According to Stein, Sanders is currently in the process of reviewing the list of executive orders, but has not yet approved its official release. The internal campaign document, according to the Post, says, quote, we cannot accept delays from Congress on some of the most pressing issues, especially those like immigration, where Trump has governed with racism and for his own corrupt um, 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 his benefit, uh, corrupt. Stein noted on Twitter, more than a dozen of the potential executive orders focus on reversing Trump's inhumane immigration policies, as well as confronting longstanding problems with the U.S. Immigration systems, such as private detention facilities. News of the list of executive orders comes just days ahead of the Iowa caucuses on February 3rd, on Monday. Common Dreams has reported two recent polls showing Sanders leading the Democratic primary field in Iowa as he continues to gain momentum in other key states and nationally. And Mike Kaska, spokesperson for the Sanders campaign, refused to comment on the executive orders, saying, quote, "We're focused on organizing a huge voter turnout in Iowa on Monday." It's wonderful. But okay, I have to mention, if the executive orders are extensive enough, Sanders can gain a lot in his run just from the executive orders. And even if the victories in Congress are not sufficiently large for him to get everything he wants in the first 2 years, if he implements all the executive orders and he makes appropriate judicial appointments in those first 2 years and gets some important things that are overwhelmingly popular passed, such as Medicare for all, he can become strong enough politically that in the off-year elections he can increase his margins, as Roosevelt did in 1934. He can get bigger margins in both houses in Congress through executive orders and one or two big legislative successes. So you have to keep that in mind. Now, of course, we cannot afford to wait until 2023 to start on the Green New Deal, but he can start on it with many executive orders. He can do many things to help things through executive orders, like ending fossil fuel drilling in the United States, for example. No more. Ending fracking in the United States. He can stop that. He can stop those things and put tremendous pressure on Congress to begin to move to alternatives as fast as possible. So we can start on the Green New Deal in that way. And meanwhile, campaign through his movement. He can campaign through his movement to build huge pressure on Congress to enact the GND or get defeated in the primaries in 2022. Now, I'm expecting a pretty big victory in 2020. Okay, I think Sanders is going to add to the margins, which the Democrats have in the House. And I think the Senate could well turn, but the margins in the Senate will be small. And in the House, there are likely to still be many conservative Democrats or centrist Democrats. And he's going to have to pressure the hell out of him to move on various things, especially on some of the items in the Green New Deal agenda. So, the first step, though, is these executive orders and their use for political ends as well. Okay, so we have to face the possibility. We have to face the possibility that the Iowa and Nevada 2020 caucuses are going to be disrupted. And Truthdig had an article about that. It was published on January 29, 2020. The author was Stephen Rosenfeld, pretty good writer over the years. And he talks about what's likely to happen. He says there are scenarios that mostly concern a disruption of the caucus process in Iowa in cyberspace, from either sabotaging the voting technology or disinformation about the reported outcome. And he says the same threats would also face the Nevada caucus, 2020's third contest, and also a state party-run presidential caucus. And he points out that the Associated Press, K and NPR, have worried that Iowa's use of a smartphone app by 1,600 plus of the precinct chairs to report the local results is a cybersecurity risk. The Washington Post has worried about disinformation because the Iowa Democratic Party will release two potentially conflicting figures: the raw vote counts and the delegates awarded. As far as the Nevada caucus is concerned, they're also using a precinct reporting act and will release those same figures. So the officials at the Iowa Democratic Party and also the Nevada State Democratic Party, okay, and the DNC and even the Federal Department of Homeland Security all said many steps have been taken to avert threats that could disrupt the process. The state parties also further said they have ramped up their efforts to combat the disinformation. And the Iowa Democratic Party chair intoned, quote, "We take our responsibility to protect the integrity of the democratic process and secure Iowans' votes very seriously," unquote. Yeah, like the integrity of the process was so well protected, in Iowa in 2016 that Hillary Clinton won 6 out of 6 critical coin tosses that shifted votes in the Iowa caucuses and gave her a very, very narrow victory. What are the odds of winning 6 out of 6 coin tosses? Well, of course, they are astronomical. It is literally, well, I shouldn't say that it's impossible, but it is virtually impossible to win 6 consecutive coin tosses if you're not playing with a loaded coin. Shelby Wiltz, who's the Nevada State Democratic Party caucus director, said by email that they've been committed to making our first in the West caucus the most accessible, expansive, and transparent caucus yet. We developed a smartphone app in order to streamline the process and provide our volunteers with additional support to run their caucuses as efficiently um, uh, as is possible. Well, efficiency is great, but I think effectiveness is better. What effectiveness means is you get the valid result, the right result, the result as was actually voted, not the most speedy result. However, the article says if something were to go badly wrong with compiling results in Iowa or Nevada, something of a scale that exceeds the random confusion that comes with using any new voting tool, it is unlikely that the two states' backup systems could quickly verify the results in the wee hours after the caucus's end. Certainly not before some candidate claims victory and boards a post-midnight plane to the next state. That assessment comes from examining publicly available party documents, which are linked to here, about potential caucus but recounts. Both states are using similar technology procedures and press statements. The documents, especially in Nevada 2020 caucus recount manual, suggest it could be a week or more before the party could examine their paper records to see if they match the app-filed electronic results. Oh, the initial days come from but the initial delays come from assembling all the paper records. If something fails, then what? Asked the computer scientist who has analyzed voting systems since the 1990s. The question is not as easily answered by saying, quote, there are paper backups, so don't worry, unquote. Quote again, if there are failures, what is the backup plan? What is the process if there are electronic failures of some kind? What happens if something written down on paper doesn't match the electronic versions? Then what do they do? Well, caucus voting is different from primary voting. Caucuses have 2 rounds of voting, where any candidate who gets less than a viability threshold, usually 15%, is disqualified. Voters rank their choices, and if their first choice is not viable, their next viable candidate will get their vote. Will get their vote unless they go home. If they decide to go home, then their next viable candidate will not get their vote. They have a choice. They can go home and not vote for anybody else, or they can stay and go for their second choice. Anyway, the author, Steve Rosenfeld, says this process requires the caucus chairs to do some math. After the voting, each caucus divides a preset number of delegates to the winners. The allocations are based not on how many people show up in a locality, but by geography to balance urban, suburban, and rural representation. All of this complexity is why the Iowa and Nevada state parties wanted to develop an act for precinct chairs to use, first for the caucus math and then to transmit the results of their rounds of voting and delegate allocations. As for the Nevada caucus, the chairs will also receive the results of early voting before their caucus begins. Iowa does not have an early voting option. Roosevelt says, quote, using the app as a calculator is not controversial, although it is likely to lead to some degree of user confusion due to unfamiliarity. That assessment comes from Iowa academics who note that most caucus chairs are over 60 years old and would rather call in their results than calculate them through an unfamiliar app. But security experts consider receiving and sending data via Wi-Fi or cell phones as risky. Also, because caucuses aren't like the primaries. The primaries are actually, to some degree, government-run elections. Now, I think that I botched that up. I think he meant to say that caucuses, in a manner similar to primaries, are not run by the government. So there are few legal penalties for meddling. There are a few other differences between Nevada and Iowa in the approaches and technology each has chosen. The only time Iowa will expose voting data to online threats is at the end of the night when precinct chairs use the app to file results. When it comes to Nevada, though, there are more digital systems in use. That state party will link early voting sites to an online voter registration system. Iowa will print lists of voters by precinct. However, Nevada will differ because it will offer 4 days of early voting, where participants will use party-owned tablets to do online voting. I don't know about this. Nevada also will send the early voting results to each precinct chair's app so that all the early votes and live attendee votes are applied at the local level. In other words, the Nevada digital system is more complex than Iowa's system and perhaps more inclusive and perhaps more hackable and more risky. That's something I added. Both state parties also have some backup plans that were approved by the DNC's technology team. Doesn't that give you a terrific feeling of confidence? And by the DNC's Rules and Bylaws Committee. Oh boy. Of course, the Rules Committees and the Bylaws Committees are just getting stacked with Hillary bots and Obama bots, who are likely to favor Joe Biden, aren't they? And maybe Buttigieg and maybe Klobuchar. The states must have paper record backups of all the voting. Thus, every caucus voter will fill out a presidential preference card. The caucus chairs will also fill out summary sheets. In general, coverage of these 2020 plans is focused on the cybersecurity and disinformation threats. Those reports, in turn, have prompted top party officials to take second looks at their mostly undisclosed precautions and publicly seek to project but confidence. They're always good at projecting confidence, and their confidence is always entirely misleading. The Rules Committee has been following the news story and has inquired about the facts, said James Roosevelt Jr., Rules and Bylaws Committee co-chair. He is, I believe, the grandson of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and he must be fairly advanced in age himself right now, by now. Quote, and while it is not something that comes to us for approval, we have not learned anything that would lead us to intervene, unquote. But the media coverage hasn't focused on what would happen next if something significantly interrupted, disrupted, or corrupted any part of the caucus process. State party officials have not addressed that kind of scenario. But, says Mr. Rosenfeld, if one parses the timelines laid out in state party documents concerning any possible recount, it appears it could be many days before the final results would be publicly released should some large-scale disruption occur. Iowa has not released any document explaining how it will handle recounts. However, Nevada has. They have a recount manual. It also would not look at any falsified kinds of voter registrations or bad behavior by participants. It would not look at the voter intent on the individual presidential preference cards. Both of these things happened in the past. But what its process would do would only manually compare the results on the precinct summary sheet to what the caucus chair app reported or the chair called in. So in other words, it will guard against one sort of cheating, but it's not going to guard against more serious forms of cheating. Campaigns which would have to pay for the recount up front can send their representatives to observe, but reporters and the public are excluded, the document said. And the Nevada recount process would finish 13 days after the state's February 22nd caucus. If I am not mistaken, that would be after Super Tuesday, wouldn't it? Isn't Super Tuesday on March 3rd? Or am I mistaken about that? So Steve Rosenfeld said, these details suggest different potential snafus in these two high-profile caucus states. It says Iowa has fewer cybersecurity risks because their system has fewer online elements. But because the state party will release two sets of numbers, raw vote totals, and also delegates awarded, there is a prospect of some disinformation if the popular vote winner does not emerge as the winner of the most delegates to the process's next stage. In other words, the likelihood of disinformation seems more likely than a voting system type meltdown, especially if people do not understand the delegate allocations are akin to a state version of the federal electoral college. To be sure, Iowa National Party officials are well aware of this scenario. Fundamentally, if people want to cast doubts on the result, they can always find ways to do so. This is not what democracy looks like, said but Jimmy Roosevelt Jr., the Rules Committee co-chair. In fact, I'm sorry, they can always find ways to say this is not what democracy looks like, he said. But then he went on. In fact, this is what democracy looks like in a diverse country. There are urban areas, there are academic areas, there are rural areas, and different numbers of people will caucus in those areas. But they will be aggregated for a congressional district of a total. So it is what democracy looks like. No, Jimmy, it's not what democracy looks like. If it doesn't make the winner of the caucus the person who gets the majority of votes, it isn't what democracy looks like. On the other hand, the Nevada State Party is asking more from its digital tools and from its caucus chairs and volunteers that will run their caucuses. While they, like the Iowa Party, have partnered with the same security experts in government, the Department of Homeland Security, and academia, Harvard's Defending Digital Democracy Project, haven't they got a Big Ten? Haven't they got a Big Ten equivalent of Harvard's Defending Digital Democracy Project? That government officials have been working with, to prepare for the 2020 elections. The 2020 Nevada caucuses will rely on several online-based elements: vote total transmissions by voter registration and online voting for uh, early voters. For months, the Nevada Party statements have been upbeat and emphasize their expectations of success. They have released documents with timelines and details if a recount is necessary. But compared to the Iowa Democratic Party, compared to them, what the Democratic Party in uh, what the Nevada Party is doing is placing a bigger bet that their digit tools are going to deliver. Throughout this entire process, protecting the voices of Nevada Democrats has been our number one priority, said Shelby Wiltz, caucus director. We can quote, we continue to work with a team of security experts with varying backgrounds to combat disinformation and to ensure the integrity of our process. Unquote. Sounds like we got troubles in both the Iowa caucuses and also the Nevada caucuses. And we can't forget, that in the Nevada caucuses in 2016, the Bernie forces were treated very illegitimately and very roughly. There was certainly cheating that brought a victory to Hillary Clinton there as well. As was the case in Iowa. Generally, Bernie did very well in caucus states. He did very well in caucus states. But in what were probably the two most important caucus states in the early going in 2016, Bernie was cheated in both places by the state parties. For sure. So, with that, Bernie's gaining steam. Many things are very, very hopeful. But we don't know how the election machinery is going to work out. We don't know what the impact of the state parties, which are all DNC related, what kind of impact they are going to have in taking the victory away from Bernie by cheating. I don't know how the Bernie campaign plans to cope with that. I'm sure they have plans. I'm sure they're going to do everything they can. I'm sure they've been planning for it after 2016. They would not turn a blind eye to that. But whether their plans will be successful, we still have to learn. So, when this goes up on YouTube, please share, like, and subscribe. And please become a patron at www.patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. And thank you for any help that you can give. I'll now proceed to read through your comments. Please share this. Sharing, according to what I see, has been a little light here tonight. I'm grateful for all the shares that you can do. I see I'm getting a message from somebody from Supermajority News saying, "Want to build a future without sexual violence? Start with middle school boys." I personally think that's too late to start. I think it has to start early. Start in kindergarten. Start in pre-K. No bullying. Violence is unacceptable in school. People need to be taught that early. Evelina says Palestinian Americans endorse Bernie because he views them as human and worthy of rights despite his support for Zionism, the spokeswoman said. Your thoughts? My thoughts are that there are many interpretations of what's meant by Zionism. And Bernie's interpretation, okay, of Zionism is certainly far different from the interpretations of that term that the settlers and the right wing, okay, in Israel appear to believe in. I don't think that Bernie's opinions have very much in common with the political factions currently dominant in the state of Israel. And I'm sure one of the things that Bernie will try to do is to give support to the more secular elements of the Israeli population, of which there are still a substantial number. And Steve Wolfbrand said, "I saw status quo. Jordan is doing good out there." Yep, Jordan's doing very well out there indeed. He's growing fast, and I think he's getting something very successful going. Kay says he is with help from Jamal. I think it's JMALK. And Steve says, yes, Jamal. he was getting help from Marcus Ely, okay, as well. But Marcus had to take a personal leave just a couple of days ago. But he was doing some really great interviews. Steve says, "I can feel the energy in Iowa from California." Yeah, you can feel it. All you got to do is watch those events. I mean, the energy is really something. Yeah, Jane Sanders was there this evening. What a sweetheart. And Lana said, Joy's video today was great. Yeah, it was. It was the freezing that did it. uh, and Texas, Doc. I haven't seen much of the meetings in Texas from the campaign yet. I'm sure we're going to see a lot of those in coming weeks. This case says, seeing some here in Redneck, the GOP ruined Ohio too, hoping it spreads. Got some good progressive, but younger folks were running for Congress. One is even primarying the old Dem, but from the Columbus area. Who is that old Dem from the Columbus area? Okay. Okay. And Evelina Point says, Facebook friends from other nations far and near like Bernie. Yes, they do. And Joy even indicated that there are some of them who came to Iowa to help with the door knocking. And Steve Wolfbrand says, I think Tulsi will do better than expected, especially in New Hampshire. I think Tulsi is doing pretty well in New Hampshire. She's had some really good meetings, town halls there. I've seen some of them, and I think that she is going to do better than expected in New Hampshire. But I'll tell you, those Bloomberg ads, boy, every time you turn around, I mean, I don't watch ordinary television. I'm okay on YouTube right now, and I am getting ads from Bloomberg almost every time that I turn on a video. It starts with a Bloomberg ad of some sort. All I can say is, thank God they're short. Kay says, the Rational National had a post today that showed Biden's lies pretty much the whole time he's been in politics. I saw that one too. Keeps poking people and telling them to vote for someone else. But laugh out loud. Well, he's telling the truth. He's telling the truth about that, isn't he? And Canada, Lana says. Yeah, he's probably getting a lot of support from Canada. Can you explain how high speed, high speed broadband inside of the Green New Deal is a good thing uh, 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 ecologically? Uh, okay, I'm not sure about the side effects of 5G in the long run, so I don't think I can answer the ecological question. Okay, at this point, because everything seems to be going to uh, 5G now. And we're not even certain of the long term impacts, okay, of 4G, which is what we have now. Uh, But I think the reason why broadband is inside of, of the GND is because, okay, of its economic impacts. One of the goals, okay, of the GND is to wake up the rural areas economically, so people can be comfortable staying there, okay, and but also living there and growing the economy, okay, in these areas. And from the standpoint of the economics of it, the internet is really necessary for that, and high speed internet, okay, is necessary for that. But whether 5G is necessary, that I am not sure. And even if it is necessary, it may be something we have to live without due to the long term effects. Unfortunately, uh, we seem to be doomed to experiencing those long term effects before we can moderate them because commercial interests are plunging us headlong into 5G right now. Kay says, I'm excited about the next Monday too, Steve. First time I've been this excited in a long time. I was last time that Bernie ran too, but he's way ahead on organization this time. He is. He's way ahead on organization. He might even be even further ahead, okay, on enthusiasm. Now, last time there was fantastic enthusiasm too, but I don't think the base was as broad as it is now. His base is much broader now. The base of volunteers is much broader. Evelina says, I think Bernie would rather have things done by through legislation rather than executive orders. Yeah, I think so too. Seems to be the trend in progressive democracies, right? Yes, it is. It's always to be preferred. But if he doesn't have the majorities in Congress, and if he can't get the Congress people to vote for certain things, or if he needs to make quick impacts, he needs to do the executive orders so people don't have to wait for things. Also, if he does the executive orders and then pushes for the legislation, and people like the impact of the executive orders, then Congress is much less likely to say no. Much less likely to say no. Lotta says, I won't cheer for anyone to have that, okay, any illness, but I don't think he is fit to be president. I'm sure you're referring to Joe Biden. Okay, and Evelina says, get things done. Yes, I think we figured that. Well, bear with me for a minute while my scroll bar decides to start to work again. And Lana says, James Roosevelt Jr. is 74 years old, per wiki. Thank you, Lana. Thank you. I thought he was getting up there because his father, Jimmy Roosevelt, was older than I was in the early 60s when the Liberal Hour was published, which was a collection that he was very active in. He was in Congress at the time, one of the more progressive members of Congress. In the old days, the liberal members of Congress were the progressive members of Congress. They were, during the 50s and 60s, the same. Lana says, The coin toss in Iowa was a bunch of BS, and she says we need to go back to exit polls too. Absolutely, Lana. We need to go back to the exit polls. Steve says, I'm not cheering for it. I feel sorry for him. My mother died of Alzheimer's too, not too long ago. It was horrible. Yes, a friend of mine also died of Alzheimer's not too long ago, and that was pretty bad too. Very, very bad. Dan Whitfield has joined. That coin toss in Iowa was a bunch of BS. We need to go back to exit polls too. Kay says we need open primaries and paper mail-in ballots everywhere. Yes. Evelina, Dr. Joe, surely if paper vote doesn't match the electronic vote, but then we vote again. But no. Well, that's going to depend on the state parties, okay, as to whether they vote again. Okay. But even if they vote again, it's not going to happen quickly, Evelina. So it's not really going to affect the primary. Okay, in other words, the initial result that gets reported to the public is what's going to have the momentum, okay, in back of it. Okay, if a correction is not made, okay, inside of a week, then to all intents and purposes, the person who was declared the original winner of the Iowa primary is going to remain the winner, okay, of the Iowa primary for momentum purposes. And the same with the New Hampshire primary. I should say the Iowa caucuses, okay, and the New Hampshire primary. The corrections that come a month later are not going to do any good for the person who benefits from the correction. It'll swing a few delegates, and that's all. And it won't mean anything for the momentum. It's the momentum, it's the media stories, it's all about that. Unfortunately, it's not about what really happened. It's about our perceptions of what really happened. Again, my scroll bar is a little hung up. It'll unfreeze in just a minute. There was a new comment. Okay, I see Nissa Ray has joined. Okay, says, I can't remember the old Dem's name, but she's an older lady of color. Okay, are you thinking of Marcia Fudge? I didn't think she was from Columbus. Is she? Okay, Nissa Ray has joined. And Evelina Ponce says, economic rationale, not ecological rationale. Yes, I think the rationale is economic. Okay, it's part of the just transition aspect, okay, of the GND. But having access to broadband is going to begin to wake up, okay, a lot of those areas. You combine that with the job guarantee, and it makes a powerful combination to start to generate some new businesses in these areas. No, Joe, that isn't the name. Okay. Well, thank you, Kay. Okay, so where is Marcia Fudge's district? Anybody know? I have a friend here whose last name is Fudge, who tells me that Marcia Fudge is his cousin. Okay, any last minute comments? I think we are through your list of comments. Thank you for them. They were good comments, as they always are. Okay, I'll be back on Saturday. Not sure what I'll be talking about on Saturday, but there's a good likelihood it'll be the upcoming caucuses in Iowa on Monday. And I may be talking once again about them on Monday night, or maybe not, because they may be going on, okay, on Monday night. And the results may not be in until the wee hours of the morning, though I hope that Bernie has a big enough lead that it turns out he breezes to victory. That would be wonderful. If so, I will certainly talk about that on Monday night. But on Saturday night, I'm not entirely certain what I want to talk about. But I'll be back Saturday night. I won't be live streaming tomorrow, and I don't think I'll be live streaming on Sunday. Unless things get so hot I have to live stream about something. So thank you all for coming, and thank you again for the comments. And I'm going to say good night. Please share this. Thank you.